Hello, welcome to Integrated Wellbeing YouTube channel and podcast for people in grief and the professionals who serve them. We provide education, inspiration, and practical tools by interviewing those bereaved by loss, mental health professionals, and grief specialists. Integrated Wellbeing Institute seeks to awaken the griever to their inner peace through the guidance of their body. So I am delighted to introduce our guest today, Beth Darling. Hello, Beth. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here, actually. Thank you very much.
I'm so grateful for your yes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Beth, and then in the notes below, you'll be able to read her entire bio. She's an internationally recognized author, radio host, speaker, and coach with a unique blend of expertise and charisma. A former board-certified divorce lawyer, she made a transformative flip to devote her career to the enhancement of love and intimacy, helping couples maintain their loving connection even through grief. And that's why I invited her here today. It's a subject we haven't talked about. Beth is in this journey of grief herself. She's navigating it now after the loss of her beloved daughter. And that's how Beth and I met. I was facilitating a group of those bereaved by loss, and Beth showed up in the group. I immediately recognized her spark in her leadership in the cover of Grief. And so I've been very curious about her and have really been grateful to her for sharing as much as she has about herself. She has 2 award-winning books. One is the Love and Laughter, Sexy, Meaningful Fun for Everyone, and 5 Kinds of Intimacy, How to Keep Your Love Alive. So Beth, welcome. Show us the cover of the 5 Kinds of Intimacy, please. See,
There you go.
It's just a riot. It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm so glad to be here. And I think that people, when it comes to love and sex, that we think it's either got to be totally serious or totally, raunchy and trite and trivial. And I just think it is life affirming. It is the way that we connect. It should be one of the best parts of life. And so I try to bring that little bit of playfulness to a topic that other people often find intimidating.
Oh my goodness, it goes back to our Puritan roots, Beth. I mean, here we were dressed up in our collars and we weren't going to talk about sex when we landed at the Mayflower Lab. So here we are. So begin to teach us about your worldview, because as you said, serious or raunchy, there's a great deal of difference in between. What would you like our audience to know?
Well, that as a divorce lawyer, which is where I start, I saw lots of couples who needed to get divorced, right? Had bad relationships. That was fine. Still hard, but necessary. The waste, and the thing that I found the most frustrating was when I saw good relationships that had gone bad because people didn't teach them how to love each other well. So I say it's like throwing 2 amateurs with a couple of tennis rackets and balls on a tennis court, locking them up for 20 years and saying, enjoy this for the rest of your life and figure out how to do it well. But we don't want to talk about it. We're not going to give you any hints. Oh my gosh. And that's just frustrating and it's hard. So then when I stopped practicing divorce law, but when I got divorced myself after 23 years of marriage and quite frankly, 23 years of what I call BMS, which is boring married sex.
Okay.
Right. You don't have to be married to have that. But I said I wanted better, but I didn't know how to do it. I was so upset. I was so intimidated by my own body, so ashamed. And so this was my journey to learning how to embrace, to feel like a woman and be smart and be productive, etc. So I began this journey. I started a shop. I began coaching people after several years of relationship stuff, which I had been doing as a divorce lawyer anyway, and a divorce coach. But then I started focusing also on the sexy part. And it was working with my clients now as a relationship coach that I realized nobody had ever defined intimacy before in a way that actually works. Right? We use intimacy as a euphemism for sex, and yet that's not it. That's part of it. That's not it. And so it was over years of working with clients that I figured out that there are really 5 kinds of necessary intimacy for healthy, happiest, the most fulfilling relationships. And then I practiced those. I read it by every therapist I could find, and tried to beat it down because the lawyer in me is like, I don't want to put something out there that I can't stand behind.
Yes.
And then finally, my book, The 5 Kinds of Intimacy, came out last year, and I hold to it. And it's not just in marital or romantic relationships, but it's with our friends, it's with our children as well.
So Beth, I'm wondering if you can share with us your definition of intimacy, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. I say, intimacy is a state that results from a connection, closeness, familiarity, exposure, or proximity that is highly personal, so much so that it is likely, but not necessary, it is likely to cause a feeling of vulnerability.
So there were many facets of that. And what I appreciate most about your definition is you're calling it a state. And see, that's what I'm talking about with grief. We have the states of raw grief, fragile grief, gentle grief. It's a state of being.
Right.
Would you read that one more time, please? Because it's really profound. There's a lot in it.
Yeah, thank you. Because it is broad, but
it is.
But we'll see what it doesn't include too. Intimacy is a state that results from a connection, a closeness, familiarity, exposure, or proximity that is highly personal. So much so that it is likely to cause a feeling of vulnerability.
So now what did you do then with the book? Were each of those the states of intimacy? I'm curious, what are the 5 states?
Well, so the five kinds of intimacy.
Kinds, that's it, not
5
states,
kinds, right?
Kinds.
Because we can have all sorts, but the 5 kinds that I think are absolutely imperative are physical, emotional, sexual, romantic, and spiritual. Okay. And spiritual has nothing to do with religion, mind you. Nothing to do with religion. It's for everyone. So I'm happy. I'll give you a quick kind of summary of each one.
Good.
Physical can be in a crowded elevator. Okay. People are physically intimate with us. We may not like it, right? And that's why intimacy is not only voluntary. Not at all. So in a crowded elevator or a crowded bus or subway, and you know that there's intimacy because what do people do when they're in that situation? Right. They do this. They look down, they look at their phone, they look up, they do everything they can to ignore the discomfort. That discomfort is a feeling of vulnerability.
Yes.
Okay? You're in my space. So physical intimacy happens all the time, all around us. But interestingly, with couples, right, this is one of these that oftentimes we just overlook or we minimize different kinds of intimacy because we get caught up in this idea that intimacy is only sexual or something. So what people miss when they lose a partner, what I hear most often is the bed is so empty.
Yes. My widows say that to me all the time.
Yes. And that's whether they had a good relationship or a bad relationship, right? They would say to you, oh, we didn't have any intimacy. And what they really mean is we didn't like each other. We didn't have sex, but they did have physical intimacy in that bed.
Yes.
They weren't touching. It was
right.
It was intimacy, and it was significant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So emotional intimacy is, as women, we often find it by talking, by laughing, by crying together, right? We voluntarily share ourselves. But if you think back to the Will Smith who hit Chris Rock, at the Oscars, I think, I say that was a moment of emotional intimacy. The audience, he doesn't know who I am, but I got a glimpse of who Will Smith is in that moment. He didn't want to show it.
No.
He was out of control.
Yes.
But that was, so I have some emotional intimacy with him, even though it's not reciprocal.
Yes.
And men who are often taught to basically shut down and to avoid emotional intimacy, one way that they find emotional intimacy, and this is really strange for women, but how many couples do you know that will say, like, oh, at breakfast, they have breakfast together, but the wife will complain, well, he just reads the paper or looks on the phone. He doesn't pay any attention to me. But if I try to get up, then he's like, wait, why are you leaving? Stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
And women were so annoyed, like, stop trying to control me. I got things to do. What we miss is that men can oftentimes find emotional intimacy by being able to be with somebody physically and not have to step up in any other way. They don't have to worry about whether they say the right thing. They don't have to have the answers. They don't have to provide anything. Being is something that can make them feel emotionally safe and comforted and soothed in a way that we may not have realized before. But being with somebody like that makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then sexual intimacy can definitely include sexual activity, but it doesn't have to. So you and I are sharing some sexual intimacy because we're talking about things, and we probably will talk about things personally. I know I tend to. And that's a sexual intimacy. So I have sexual intimacy even with my adult children because I recognize them as adult beings. And once we can talk, our relationships becomes deeper.
Yes.
Okay. So sexual intimacy is with therapists or counselors and stuff as well. And then romantic intimacy. Some people want to say, oh, chocolate or flowers, but sure, those can be. But romantic intimacy is the only one that depends on whether or not you want to acknowledge it or not. Because if you get flowers every week from somebody, at some point, it's probably not that exciting, in which case it becomes every day. So romantic intimacy, I say, is like when things become extraordinary.
All right.
Okay. And that's what adds some spark, some liveliness. So when I talked about that BMS, boring married sex, if you actually had romantic intimacy, it's not boring anymore.
No.
Okay. So that's key. And mind you, all of these kinds of intimacies we need with ourselves first. If we can't feel it with ourselves, we're not going to feel it with somebody else. So for me, romantic intimacy is alone on the beach with the stars and the waves crashing and the breeze on my skin. It's heaven, So we all have our different ideas of what's romantic. Men, again, have been shut down. They think romance is only for women, but it's not. So a man, if you want to find out what their version of romantic intimacy is, ask them, what's hot? What's hot?
Oh, tell me more.
That's how they describe intimacy, right? It gets them a little aroused, like excited, interested, intrigued. So it might be somebody going to a sporting event and their partner not wearing any underwear. It could be making out in public. It could be holding hands in public. Some people find
Mm-hmm.
any display of affection like
Yes.
very unusual or exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be candlelight, or it could be playing a sexy playlist.
Oh.
It can be anything. And it's also, it doesn't have to be mutual, right? It doesn't have to be both of us. So, for example, I went on a whale watching trip with my granddaughter, and we saw blue whales, and I'm in tears, right? To me, this is so romantic, so exciting. She's like, she didn't feel the romance of it, but
Yes.
that's okay. She could just appreciate that I did, and she could be glad for me. And in that moment, then we still pull together because she can appreciate and enjoy my feelings.
Oh.
So, so I don't want people to think that they have to always agree. They don't. You just have to appreciate how different we are.
Exactly.
And we have to, and again, we have to each understand what works for us so our partners can understand it, and then we can claim it.
Yes. And wouldn't it be interesting to have all the people that are watching this in coupled kind of relationships or partnerships say to that person, okay, we're pausing this. What's romantic for you? Let me tell you about romance. Probably Match.com people do that on date number 1, 2, or 3. However, then it's lost and we change as people.
Yes, very much so. And to, like, that's a good thing. And I say, so for us, for you and I living in the States, to go to Paris and have a picnic at the Eiffel Tower, that would be crazy romantic for us, probably.
Yes, absolutely.
But when you live in Paris, going to the Eiffel Tower is every day. It's no longer romantic.
Yes.
And that's okay. Let's just recognize that. So that's where flowers once in a while, or a certain kind, or candies, or diamonds, those can all be romantic. But there is nothing inherently romantic pretty much about anything that I've discovered yet. It is all about the giver and the receiver and the context.
Yes. What I'm hearing is romantic sacred? It's the sacredness of things is my curiosity. Because seeing those blue whales, you were in that space of these remarkable creatures. So maybe the word I'm really looking for instead of sacred is the remarkable in romance. Makes things romantic.
Yeah, I think that's better because sacred tends to be more somber.
Yes. Okay.
And romantic can be somber, but it doesn't have to be. And so, for example, I know there was one gentleman, older gentleman, been married for, 30, 40 years. He bought a new convertible car.
Okay.
And his idea of what's romantic, i.e. what's hot, he wanted his 60-something-year-old wife to ride topless in his topless car.
How'd that work out?
Well, he was so sure that it would never work out that he was really almost ready to leave his marriage. He was like, we don't have fun together. We don't have romance. We just, I love her, right? But I'm not in love with her. I hate that. It's like, okay, then make the in love happen. And that's through romance. So finally, he got brave enough to ask his wife to do this. And she said yes.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
And what happened then was that gave her permission to ask for some crazy things that she was interested in.
There we go.
That, right? And so I say we can all be virgins at any age. We can just find new things to do that light us up, that maybe make us blush a little bit, that just make us feel like we're teenagers or silly or young and free. And that's a big deal. And in the midst of grief, the romantic might be more somber. You might not be ready for the fun parts of it, but it's still really important. It's really important. It's really so. Then the spiritual. Yes. Spiritual intimacy, again, nothing to do with religion. Spiritual intimacy is the feeling or knowing, the believing that what you are doing, that you are doing the right thing with the right person at the right time, that it is good, not just for you, but also for them, for your family, for the world at large, i.e. blessed by whatever your version of the divine is. And so some people cannot have spiritual intimacy if there's a pile of dirty laundry, right? They can't be free. They're fixated on that. They cannot really get into, they can't be wholehearted about whatever else they're doing. I came up, spiritual intimacy was the last one, and it came up because I was working with a couple whose house had been destroyed by one of our hurricanes in Houston. They had planned a 25th anniversary big cruise, but instead all of their money was now going to fix their home. So they came to me for a staycation. And what I realized, they were very much in love with each other, two very attractive kids. I mean, they were in their 40s, 25 years together. They'd known each other since high school, since junior high maybe, grew up small town Texas, very religious. So when it came to sexual activity, when the husband asked for anything, the wife would hear in her head, ooh, he wouldn't respect me if I did that, or he must not respect me to ask me to do that. Or good girls don't do that. Mothers don't do that. Good wives don't, right? So she didn't have any spiritual intimacy, and it was destroying their marriage, even though they really loved each other and had a great life. So she had to work on learning that, in her view, it was Jesus. Jesus wanted her to love her husband.
Yes.
And Jesus, I say, if you believe in the divine God, our bodies, they're a buffet of pleasure given to us by the divine.
I love that.
Right? And to refuse that, to refuse to enjoy it in a respectful, honorable way, in this case with her husband, was really to deny the gifts that the divine has given her. So she learned that the more fun she had with her husband, the more love they had, the closer to Jesus she felt. And yeah.
That was a flip. That was a real big change in perception and the lens she was wearing and what was hearing in her head. How long did that take you? Because I'm imagining that was one of your coaching clients.
Yeah, it's a few months, right? A few months. Because it fits with the logic, right? She just hadn't puzzled it out. And I think I like having my logical, lawyer, rational brain as well as this romantic, idealistic, because I have to parse things out. It has to make sense. But once it does, then it's so easy. It's so easy to follow. And that's how I feel about these 5 kinds of intimacy. Once we understand them, then it's so easy to say, ooh, this is missing in our relationship. This we need work on. This, and so we can. It becomes more objective, if you will, which my rational brain likes. So,
well, I appreciate this. What is intimacy and your definition? So here's one. What is sex?
So sex, I believe in a little irreverence, all right? But again, I do this work. I take this so seriously because I believe it's one of the cores of joy in life. But sex actually has become all about his orgasm. Because I don't know how many married women I've had, and I would say, when was the last time you had sex? And they'd be like, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. I was like, well, was it fun? Did you climax? No. I was like, oh my God, right? Who wants to engage in that?
Yes, exactly.
So I prefer, when I'm encouraging people, I want to encourage them to have sexy fun.
Okay, tell us more. Sexy fun and grief certainly don't sound like they go together, Beth, but tell us more.
They do have we have a hard time putting those together. And that's kind of why you and I are talking here, right?
That's exactly right.
So sexy fun, think of it like going to the theater, right? A typical sex is penetration and his orgasm, then it ends.
Yes.
They even have a name, they have foreplay for anything that is not the penetration and his orgasm. So I don't like that word either. When we go to the theater, I say foreplay is like if I shower and shave my legs before I go. Once I sit down in the theater and the curtain goes up, that's the show, the whole show. There might be a climactic moment at the beginning, at the middle, or the end, but I'm not going just for that. It's the show as a whole that I'm enjoying. Sexy fun recognizes that. So sexy fun could be simply a text saying, I miss kissing you. Or I can't wait to kiss you. It can involve just reaching over and grabbing somebody's hand in the middle of a family dinner and just squeezing just a little bit of, I love you, you're hot, whatever. So sexy fun doesn't have to include penetration, right? It doesn't have to include orgasm, but it can be something that lights us up a little bit, that energizes us, and that creates connection, because it's sexual activity, which is sexual intimacy, which intimacy is like once you start having some, you want more.
That's exactly right. More. Well, and you were talking and said, you know, men are taught to avoid emotion. Tell us more about that.
So I actually think heterosexual relationships in our current day and age are actually set up to fail, because men are taught to avoid emotional intimacy. Don't show your feelings, don't cry, don't tell somebody you want them, until and unless they're in the middle of sexual intimacy. That's when then men are like, I love you, I need you, I want you, I never want to get out of bed, you're the best, I feel like I feel so good when I'm with you. And so sexual intimacy is their sort of cue, if you will, to allow their heart to open. Women, we're taught exactly the opposite. We are taught to avoid sexual intimacy until and unless we get our emotional needs met. And then worst of all, we are then taught to give sex, give our virginity, right? It starts at the very beginning. Give sex as a reward for helping us feel better emotionally. And then when we get into a committed partnership, a marriage or whatnot, things kind of flip. And suddenly, I say emotional intimacy is now sort of expected.
Yes.
And therefore, if it's expected, we don't need to reward somebody for it. Therefore, sexual activity flies out the window.
Wow.
And that's just a disservice, right? So that's, my first book, Love and Laughter, was about teaching women to be able to enjoy their body in a way that I wasn't able to, and until later, and to help people get through that, to recognize then that sexual activity should be for our sake as well as our partners, right? That spiritual intimacy, it's good for me, it's good for you.
Yes.
And so if we don't like our body, if we have shame, it's never going to be good. And therefore, typically in a heterosexual relationship, somebody will start withholding. And then as soon as you withhold one kind of intimacy, then we start withholding other kinds of intimacy. And it just goes down for there. And if you talk about any sort of a lesbian or a gay relationship, they also have troubles, because two women haven't necessarily focused on sexual intimacy, and men haven't focused on emotional intimacy. So wherever we are, right, we all need to master each of these 5 kinds of intimacy. And that's when then we can hold on. Because otherwise, like my daughter, actually, she used to get upset if somebody didn't clean up the kitchen or something. And it was like, well, why is that more important than your boyfriend's desire for more sex? Well, everybody should have a clean kitchen. I was like, he thinks everybody should have more sex. I was like, you cannot prioritize. And that's it. These 5 kinds of intimacy are equally important. Without them, without one of those, you're at best at an 80%, which is not good. And that's if everything else is perfect.
Exactly. Yes.
So instead of withdrawing, go forward, add
Mm-hmm.
more of whichever kind is easiest to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, have you ever had a study group around your book?
No, I have not really. I've done classes where I've sort of, because I've been using this approach for years and years now. But not directly related and pinpointed. So that would be
Mm-hmm.
fun though. Yeah,
I think it
would
would
be fun.
really be cool. So I'm going to invite anyone that's watching this interview. Beth's email is in the notes below. So email her, because with the advent of Zoom, people can gather all over the country. And it could be even something that couples who regularly see each other do could have an opportunity to read this and deepen their own relationships as friends.
Yes. And because that way you encourage, right? It's the same thing in grief. I joined your grief group because I needed to not be alone in this. So nobody else was going to have my exact experience, but they were going on a very similar journey with me, and that felt good. So I could share my ups and my downs and my struggles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like I said, when we just throw people on the tennis court about sex, we don't have that, and we need it. People deserve it. So while people think, oh, I'd be too embarrassed to share it with people I know, I'm like, no, those are the ones we need to do, because we can keep each other going. And there's 17 exercises in my book about creating easy, fun ways to create intimacy. And you can have challenges, and you can make it, laughing. You don't have to share the specifics or anything if you don't want to, but it's this idea of, oh yeah, we're loving our life together. We're loving our life together by loving each other. And and we should be rewarding that, not always griping about how bad and how hard relationships are.
Well, and I loved our earlier conversation when you really said, it's a sign of life and aliveness to have a full kind of sexual life, is what I'm remembering. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think that's why for people in grief, I think that's why it is so hard to engage in physical intimacy and sexual intimacy and romantic. So it's because that spiritual intimacy is interrupted. We have this feeling, this sense of, I'm grieving. I shouldn't be enjoying life.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's not right. I'm being disrespectful to somebody, whomever I've lost, or other people around me might think that I'm not taking it seriously, or that I didn't love them enough, or, and so I fought it, have this sort of urge for life to stop, all of life to stop around us.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be. I am in such despair. Nobody else should have pleasure and life right now. Yeah.
Right. I can't allow myself, because
exactly
that would be bad. Yeah.
And I don't know how many times you've given people permission, but over and over again, working with people grieving, I've given them permission to laugh. I think I did that in our group, to be able to have a moment where you feel like you're a dolphin who's come up for psychological air before you go back down in the depths of grief.
Right.
Tell us about your cottage and the couple that came in whose child was at MD Anderson, please.
So I think they were the ones that sort of awakened me to the importance of this during difficult grieving times. This was a couple, and they'd been together about 20 years, but they'd actually separated. Were on the path to divorce when their son, the son in early 20s or something, a young adult who wasn't married, was diagnosed with a serious cancer. He didn't have a spouse to support him, so his parents were going to have to. And the parents just stumbled in when I had the shop in Houston, and they came in looking for things to help make sexy fun, because they said, we recognized that we needed to be strong and we needed to be together, for both our sakes, to support each other and so we could support our kid going through this. And we can't do that if we're not having a healthy, happy, sexy life, because that was key. And so they were like, okay, it's kind of weird. Our kid gets cancer. We have to improve our sex life. But
Yes.
but they were so right, because your dolphin, they were going to be underwater for long periods of time together.
They
And the
were.
only way to do that was for them to have some breath together, to have a little bit of joy and connection. And again, it doesn't have to be. I never expect people to do more than is possible. So it may not be possible to laugh, right? It may not be possible to have fun, sexy.
Right.
But there's also this idea, there's making love, right? This making love term that can be more somber and yet still physically merging, physically important, and give us a connection that in monogamous relationships, right, we're not getting with anybody else in the world.
That's right.
So it needs to come from together. And it feels like a little spark of life. It is a recognition that there is something special between us and that it can continue despite other losses and hardships. So I think it has to be really cultivated, even though it feels very, very difficult. Even if people just take it very, very, very slowly, I think it's key, especially because when people stop having sexy activity together, they actually, they withdraw physically from each other too.
Yes.
And that is incredibly detrimental.
It is.
Especially, again, men and women, we're different. Women, we tend to hug a lot more people. So we may still be getting our touch needs met.
Yes.
But our male partners, they aren't hugging their male friends all the time usually and stuff. So they're not getting touched then at all if it's not coming from their spouse. So then you've lost physical intimacy and sexual intimacy. And, and so if you need an excuse, if people need an excuse, right, to say this really is important, because like we eat because we know it's important. We force ourselves to sleep because we know it's necessary. Well, there are benefits to physical touch as well as to orgasm, and they're seriously impactful benefits. So simple touch releases oxytocin and dopamine. Those are happy hormones.
Yes.
Oxytocin is the one that is the bonding hormone, all right, that women get a surge of when we give birth because we have to attach to this crying, screaming, thing that's going to demand a lot from us. If we're not bonded, we're like, hell no, I'm out of here. Okay, so oxytocin is strong. Well, during orgasm, women get a big dose of oxytocin and a healthy dose of dopamine. Men get some oxytocin and a really good dose of dopamine. Either way, it lifts us up. And those chemicals, those endorphins, they, along with everything else that happens in our body, it helps us fight infection 20% more. I said, when COVID started, we should have told the world, start self-pleasuring, start orgasming, because that can help. It helps alleviate our stress, decreases the cortisol, which then helps our blood pressure, which is key, because in grief, it's, that's traumatic. It helps alleviate pain, headaches, cramps, everything like that. And again, makes us chemically bond more with our partner, which helps that more in love or connected rather than isolating and withdrawing until there's no marriage left. Then you have your grief and the loss of the original grief and the grief of losing a relationship that's important to you.
Yes, exactly. And it was interesting as you were talking, because what came to mind is that when we're in that intimacy, we're nurturing one another, we're being nurtured. And my discovery of being in horrific grief is self-care is essential. And so what this is I want to invite the people listening as our audience today to consider how this can be self-care. as a way of nurturing, because you've already talked about the dopamine, you've already talked about the oxytocin, and it's like, oh, yes, what do I really want to have happen? I want to feel better. I don't know how many times I've heard that.
Yeah.
I want to feel like myself again. This may be one thing that gives us that tiny little spark and sliver of feeling like myself again. We'll never feel like ourselves again because you can't go back.
Right.
But
we can go forward, right? And
yes.
The question is, do we go forward alone?
Yes.
Right? A scorched earth kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
Or do we try to be the phoenix, to rise up, to create something? We didn't want to burn it down. We didn't have a choice.
Right.
Question is, now, can we rise up and create something that is beautiful, that is empowering, that is good for me, good for you, good for everybody around us? And that is really key. And that's the thing. It shouldn't be a one-way street. It should not be a drain. You should be getting something else back. And I think, again, I know I rely a lot on stereotypes, and mind you, I'm not trying to encourage them. I just think that if we don't recognize them, we can't deal with them. We can't create goodness from where we are if we're pretending we're someplace else. So oftentimes in relationships, men, again, they're not used to this emotional intimacy. So they're not really comfortable talking and crying all the time for a prolonged period of time.
Yes.
And so what happens in the midst of sexual intimacy, this is kind of weird, but men are taught from an early age that their success is based on what they do, what they accomplish.
Yes.
For a man to give his partner sexual pleasure starts to heal him. Because when we've lost somebody, right, we haven't had control over that. It makes us all feel impotent.
Yes.
And we need to sort of find things that we can do something about, some way to feel that we have some control over something, whatever little bit it is. So allowing somebody to pleasure you is a gift, right? It's an honor, it's a gift, it's meaningful. It is not trite. And that little bit, crawling into bed with somebody, being naked, being that vulnerable, allowing them to help pleasure you, gives them a little bit of sense of, okay, this, my self-worth, there's a little something, right? I couldn't save the other person, but I can do this.
Yes.
I feel better, you feel better, we feel connected, and I feel a little bit stronger.
And I just love what you said, because it's like coming home to yourself. I'm stronger now. I recognize what I heard is I recognize what's happening. I'm relating to you. And maybe there can be a little bit of the release of grief. I don't know. But that's my hope.
Yeah. And even if it doesn't alleviate grief significantly, I think there is a sense at least that we're in this together.
Yes.
Because so often that's what happens. Because we all grieve differently, we start to feel more like individuals sharing a house than we do a couple.
Yes.
And so even if that sexual activity leads to tears afterwards, right? Oh my God, I can't believe we're doing this and we've lost somebody dear to us. It's something together that that you're doing and creating. And that helps. Okay, so I grieve separately, but we have this core of our relationship that we are in control of, and we are going to take seriously and protect and nurture and make it a priority.
Yes. And when people remember that there is some agency, some choice, that's what I heard you say. I can choose this. I couldn't do anything about that, but I can choose where I am in this moment. And that's why I always say healing can only happen in the moment. You know, my
Yeah.
teacher, Alana Rubenfeld, used to say awareness is the first key to change, and change happens only in the present moment, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
It really is the truth. Well,
Right.
I know you have a fabulous process you want to share with our audience before we close today. And I'm very curious, what else has come to mind that you want to share? We have plenty of time before we do the process. Is there something else, especially as, you know, a person yourself who's been in the deep grief, Beth, that you can say to our audience?
Might make me tear up a little bit, right?
Guess
But I
what? This is one
understand.
place where you can do that, and please don't apologize. I'm waiting for the
Yeah.
day, Beth, that I can watch someone on national TV who does tear up and does not say, I'm sorry.
Ooh, I like that. Yes. Yes, you're
Okay?
right. That would
Mm-hmm.
be beautiful.
Yes.
So I I think that the hardest thing is for us to give ourselves permission to live. And in fact, sometimes to kick our own ass a little bit to live.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a struggle for me. And I I love happiness. Like, I miss being a happy person.
Yes,
I'm still pretty fresh. My daughter, it's only been 7 months since she
that's
died by
right.
suicide. So this is still really, really difficult for me. So
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to think that I'm talking about this and that it's going to be easy. I I get that. Nothing about this is easy. But
That's right.
I do encourage people to recognize the importance. And I want to give people who need that sexual intimacy, I want to give them permission and grace to say it is important, right? Again,
Mm-hmm.
so much of our culture, and especially when people are in hard times, we think that sex we can just leave off, that we shouldn't talk about it, that it's selfish.
No.
It's not. So I also suggest that my book is written, and it's for men and women. I
Oh,
think
good. Okay.
yeah, I've had CEOs of multi-million dollar startups and things, who have said, and I love this. They said, I'm so brave in most aspects of my life, and I didn't realize until I read your book that I have not been brave in my relationships.
Mm.
And that, right? So that encouragement, my radio show is on ESPN Houston because I believe I can speak comfortably to men and women. So I don't
Yes.
want somebody to think, oh, this is just a, bash on men or bash on women, but it's not. It is equal opportunity. It's just do it together. So I encourage couples to read the book together. Maybe get
Good.
2 copies, read a
Yes.
chapter a week, talk about it. I've had clients who have read it out loud on car trips or have read it out loud to each other in bed. So
yes.
anything but start the conversation, because simply addressing it, even if you can't bring yourself to do anything, any sexual activity yet, if you start talking about it, if you start fostering the kinds of intimacy that are easy for you, whether it's kissing, holding hands, hugging, whether it's talking or crying, or finding exciting things to do what comes easiest, and then start sticking your toe out into the ones that are a little bit harder for you. But again,
I can't
once they
thank
start,
because 3 different people came to mind that are corporate coaching clients, and they're going to get 2 copies in the mail. So thank you very much. And you know how much I love words. So for me, as I was trying to find that synonym for romantic intimacy, what's come to me is sexual intimacy equals self-care. It just keeps repeating. See how you took a breath just now?
Yes.
And it's like, oh, if we think about that, if we think about this, because what that's going to equal then is it's going to equal a sign of life and aliveness. And that's just that teeny tiny little sliver of hope. It's like the firefly. Those of you who are in a place where there are such wonderful beings know those. And it just brings that moment of joy in the midst of grief. It's so dark.
Right. Yeah. And that's what we all need, right?
Absolutely.
We need to have some idea, some hopefulness. So
absolutely. Yeah. And know that it's under our ability to choose to do it. Like you said, there are so many things that we are blindsided by. However, here we are. So you've got this wonderful process, and I would love to be able to have you share it with our audience, please, Beth.
All right. So one of the first exercises in my book is what I call back-to-back, skin-to-skin conversations. Everybody talks about, oh, you got to look somebody in the eye, and that's great. Having conversations eye to eye is wonderful, except that what it does is it means that when you know someone well, every little micro expression, every emotion sort of flits across our face, and we don't even necessarily realize it. Somebody else may not realize it, but they understand it. It soaks in, and it can shut people down in ways that we don't recognize. So for example, if I'm telling you that part of how I deal with my grief is I go upstairs and I scream at the top of my lungs, and you, like, for just a moment go, oh, that would be so, right? Because not that you're judging me, but you're like, oh, that wouldn't work for me. But I see it across your face, and I kind of shut down. Oh, okay, let's not talk about that.
Right.
And when it comes to our closest relationships, we need to be able to have our own thoughts and feelings without adjusting for somebody else's perspective on it. So conversations back to back, skin to skin, I say, take off your shirts. But that provides support. We get the emotional and physical security of being able to lean against somebody and having them support us. We get the skin to skin contact that stimulates that oxytocin release, the happy hormones. And we get free to then speak our minds. And I say, especially for people who have a hard time verbalizing, each person should get 5, 10, 15 minutes, right? Pick a number that works for you. Start with 5 minutes each. Each person just talks for 5 minutes. They must talk about anything they want to. So it's stream of consciousness. And it's amazing what will come out. Then the other person, and set a timer so that way nobody has to actually be watching the clock. It just doesn't. Then the other person gets a few minutes, whatever, the same time, to go and just spew, to release anything that they want to. I've missed you this week. I've been miserable this week. It's been really hard. Or, oh, I'm excited. I know this is a little thing, but I'm excited. And it felt good. I forgot to tell you about it. Whatever that is. And then after both have taken turn, then you can have dialogue about it. But still back to back, skin to skin, so that you have time to breathe, to think about things, and to phrase things in a way that is constructive and still curious. You know, kindness, curiosity, generosity. That's what we want. And then schedule these every week. So my clients have had the best luck with Sunday mornings or Sunday evenings.
Oh.
And by scheduling that means that when things pop up during the week, oh, you know, I asked them to blah, 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 to do this, or I told them this irritated me and they did it anyway. I'm really kind of pissed. All right, I'll just add it to my list. We'll talk about it on Sunday during our back-to-back. And that way things don't get swept under the rug. They get to come out, but they get to come out again in a productive, healthy, happy way that is about the two of you together doing something, not somebody just accusing and trying to berate somebody else. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but I tell people, if you're having a fight, just hold hands, right? Because most of us, when we have something difficult, we pull away. Because once you're holding somebody's hand or you're touching them, it's hard to be mean. It's
It
really
is.
hard to be mean.
Mhm.
So that means that we have a different psychological, chemical response and way of presenting things. So we can talk, couples can say, hey, I'm worried that you're spending all the time in bed and that I don't know how to help you. And
Mhm.
I am afraid you're not getting better. And I'm afraid you'll never get better. And that can come out as my fear. It's not an accusation. You may not be doing anything wrong, but
Mhm.
suddenly we can see how things are affecting our partner
Mhm.
without having to feel guilty. I say we could,
Yes.
right? Somebody can have a negative reaction even when we haven't done anything wrong, but we
Right.
should be able to know what their
Mhm.
reaction is and to help.
Mhm. Well,
So,
and one of the things I love about this is it gives people permission then to know that they're going to have a chance to talk and go deeper and not be interrupted and not say we need to talk. It's on the calendar. It's
yeah,
it's self-care. Hello. It's
yes,
couple care. It's world care. Because our world would not be where we were at if people were holding hands more. I'm imagining, Beth.
right. I think that's true. And I think that investing in our relationships,
Yes.
it's worthwhile. It's the most important thing that we can do. And frankly, it sounds weird and people may not want to do without the shirt, but back-to-back conversations can happen even with your teenage kids, right? There are
Mm.
conversations that are really difficult to have face to face.
Yes.
That's why so many people talk about in the car, but
Right.
that to me, it's still a little bit harder and you're not fully concentrating. But back to
Right.
backs can be like difficult if, can be great for difficult topics with
Mm-hmm.
pretty much anybody if we're willing to. Isn't it weird that being back to back makes us feel vulnerable, right?
It does. It absolutely does. And it can happen without the skin to skin with parents and kids. And it can
Yeah.
be very, very, very useful. Well, I have learned so much through our conversation today. How can people find you who are very impatient and don't go to the show notes, Beth? How can people find you?
Thank you. You can email me, Beth at Darlingway, W-A-Y, Beth at darlingway.com. But you can also go to BethDarling.com. That's my website. You can find my books there, and my podcast and all sorts of stuff about that. So
Good.
my different classes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this healing conversation. It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. And if any of your listeners want to do groups, want to have conversations like this, I love your idea of a book club. Please reach out to me because this lights me up, and this is it helps me get out of my grief a little bit.
Good.
And I know my daughter would approve. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely, she would. Thank you so much, Beth. Take deep care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.